if I step back from my regional population map, I could think of people as having really three possible things they might be doing. They might be at home, they might be at a non-residential location, as we all are now, or they may be in the transportation system. At a very high level classification, that's pretty much it. You've got to be somewhere in one of those if you are indeed in the space at all. And I could choose my own favourite way of breaking that down further, and you might have one and you might classify the pieces slightly differently to me. So the tree trunk, the first three splits we'll probably agree on. Some of the smaller branches we might cut differently, but we can do it after a fashion. A variety of types of place of residence, but not too many varieties in there. Lots and lots and lots of conceivable non-residential locations, and a variety of types of transportation, which we may be able to model with more or less granularity. And my question for this whole project has been, what can I learn about the numbers of people who are engaged in each of those things, and over time, where could I go? My conventional source for all of those residential source, locations has tended to be census-driven data sources. Census from 2001 is not exactly open. I'm going to a meeting at ONS this Thursday to talk about how Open Government Licence and 2001 census outputs will intermesh, which is not yet signed off, but is looking sensible. So I can get hold in a reasonably open sense of basic demographic data. It doesn't have many questions about the non-residential bits, but it's got some promising things in it. I can also work my way down this tree and find good clues to quite a lot of those other activities from open sources. Some of them I will find by drilling down through data.gov.uk, some of them I'll find by a bit of other imaginative routing around, and some of them I'll find are not open. They may be government data, but not open. Some of them are kind of organisational data, not government and not open. Full range there, and like red through to, if you like, bold red is the most open here, and the fainter grey is the stuff where it's pretty ad hoc. But it exists. I can locate specific groups of people at specific times in those places. And I can do much the same with my transportation kinds of data. So if I'm looking for clues in contemporary Britain as to where people are at specific times, there are actually a lot of sources available to me. And they range from very open to currently quite problematic, some of them requiring subscriptions and other challenges. What I particularly want to be able to build is something that looks like this. A location, I'll take an example of a primary school, with some information about the numbers of people that are present. In this case, keep it simple, it might be the number of pupils that are there. Some idea of its spatial extent, in this case it might be very small, I might just put them all in one cell in my model. Some knowledge about the time profile of the activity, such as, in the case of the school, what's the school day look like, what the term dates, and some notion of the geographic area from which the catchment population is drawn. Call it an area of influence, and I could use a whole variety of more or less sophisticated ways of getting there. Word about the time profiles, because they're rather interesting and not one of the things that at the moment there's a lot of regular formatted data for. For the purposes of my modelling, I actually only want a kind of generalised time profile, something like a school day will do me for a primary school. Opening hours, transportation timetables, a variety of things which are giving me a clue about that time profile in my graph that showed through the day when are people doing this thing, is what I'm seeking for in the broad conceptual framework that I haven't explained for you. And a few things, like the quarterly labour force survey, gives me profiles of people's working patterns through lots of different classifications of industry. It's not an open data source, but it's actually a published data set that kind of has potential, could be renegotiated in different ways. Gives me quite a lot of clues about how I might profile different types of workplace. At the moment it's not open or linked. So I've got a spectrum of data that I can put in. Here's a nice one that probably will get 1 Tim Berners-Lee star. On the left, from the Civil Aviation, they might give them credit. They might get possibly Civil Aviation Authority passenger numbers, including transit passengers and everything else, monthly, published for several years in just about computer-readable form of passenger numbers through UK airports. And over here, something which I might choose to use as a proxy, which is, if you like, a flight timetable that tells me about the pattern through the day of numbers of flights that he was going through a particular airport. In that case, a PDF schedule. Not going to get many stars for that one. But there are clues there that help me to understand where my people be going. And if I throw them all together and take my Southampton patch that was on the first map, I've got lots of centroids. Add others to these. I've got lots and lots of census output areas, workplaces, postcodes, schools, colleges, universities, all sorts of containers that are being switched on and switched off at different rates over time to where people are. And since we've been doing the project, how very handy OS Open Data has come along, and instead of having to use a non-open map base, which I did on the first run, I'm using an open Meridian transport layer, which is conveniently linked to the Department for Transport open transportation model data, which gives me some traffic volumes on roads by about 17 time slices through the week. Useful too. So the point of this is, I was a random academic with a slightly crazy idea about how I could model everything. You can forgive me that. It's not really the point of what I want to say here. The model might go somewhere in time. But what I wanted was a set of input data about population, which didn't seem an unreasonable question to ask. When I started the project, some of the bits I wanted seemed to be available as open data and some not. As we've been doing it, more of the ones that we really would have liked have started to be added to the open data list. If I were to offer you a set of Dave Martin's star ratings, they wouldn't be quite the same as the ones you saw in the previous presentation. Thanks, Peter, because I didn't have to put that slide in here. Some of these sources that tell me what I want are explicitly open. Does that actually matter? I'm just an example of a person with a slightly odd application who's come along using the data here. Some of them are explicitly open, and I give them all the stars for my purposes. Some of them are coded up as national statistics, as in somebody spent a lot of time on the quality of the definitions, but at the moment they're not actually open. They're kind of encumbered by those historical licenses that you just told us about, and I'm working hard on the next generation being more open. But if they are open, they may or may not be linked, so there's another dimension to this. Some of them have got good documentation, so at least there's a PDF file or a spreadsheet or something, and at least I know the deficiencies, but some of them have a big problem because I don't have all the definitions, and actually the data are very hard to use. And some of the really valuable ones, like the annual business inquiry, it's the National Statistics product, but you've got a pay for subscription, you get a very, very generalised view, a very complex way of accessing the data. It's most definitely not open, it's not linked, and it's an important part of the Jigsaw, which happens to be my application problem. Just a couple of maps to finish off with. One of the things that we are therefore able to do when we play with this is produce some population maps, which I'm working towards being more useful for real applications. That's Southampton at 4 o'clock on a weekday afternoon. It may not be right, but it's much better than that one you saw to start with. It reflects populations that you will find concentrated in industrial estates and town centres and workplaces and universities and colleges and on the road, because those data sources are giving me some very strong ways to suggest that's the places where my fixed population must be at that time of day. And if you do want to give in, as Peter says, just for a moment to indulge in a little bit of spurious visualisation, we can take those grids and play them through the day and start getting some interesting slices which might be relevant to your application. If, for example, you're going to have a big emergency at 4 o'clock on a weekday afternoon, because my first map might help you much. Conclusion. Long-standing limitation, static residential populations. Problem has always been availability of meaningful data that might help me. We've got lots of application drivers for doing it in a more interesting and sophisticated way, which gets with the space-time dynamics. And I'm beginning to feel that we're making real progress with the application. Could we conceivably take a few of those things in the near future and start feeding something real-time into them, or near real-time? But my message, which is very sympathetic to what you've already heard, is that if we collectively do manage to generate more open data, then we should expect oddballs like me to come along and say, I want to do something with it which is completely different to what you were doing before. And it'll be a bit ropey to start with, but it does show you the route to which you might endeavour to have very, very different applications and the ability to answer very, very different questions at the end. And given that not all those data were open yet, I have to put that page through acknowledgement down, because all of that went into the map. We'll stop there.
Do you mind if we just wait? Yeah, I'm sort of conscious a little bit of time, so.